another tutorial from the sewing workshop, and we are going to tackle how to put bias binding onto your neckline and ensure that the neckline does not stretch and that it rolls in on itself and sits really well. And in this case the bias binding is rolling to the outside. You can see here how neat that looks from the outside, and I'm going to show you how to achieve this look. It's very pretty, and then you can put a hook and eye here to close this up. A neckline like this with like a really low scooped out front is not something for a beginner, at least not when you're using this really flimsy silk satin like I did. You need to work with something like quilting cotton to make it a bit easier on yourself. Before we get started on this technique, I just want to show you another dress. I'm just developing a new one, and on here I have used a much wider bias binding. This was about 6 centimeters wide, folded in half, but on this one, and this is the traditional method, I've sewn it first to the outside, rolled it to the inside, and then finished it off here. That's a different technique, but even if you roll to the outside, I would recommend that you use a much wider bias strip. Do not use something that is so small. For the blue dress, I've used a silk satin which is very slim by the time you stretch it. So you can get these pre-ironed bias bindings. So if you iron them flat and then iron them over to one side, that's a much better width to use. Then you can use that full centimeter as a seam allowance. You want something that gives you a little bit of stretch. Bias should stretch. All of these from the shop have very little stretch in them, right? Whereas the handmade ones, whoa, look at that. So the easiest thing to do is to make your own bias binding, which I did for this one, because then you can really pull on the bias to ensure that none of this comes out too big and really sits beautifully on the body. Right, let's get started. And what you want to do all the way around the armhole and around the neckline is put a stitch, widest stitch length as possible, just as if you were gathering it, and this is called a stay stitch. So once you've put that in, you pull one of them so that it's slightly held in, especially where you have the fabric on the bias, otherwise it ends up really big. And I've done the same in the front here, because by the time you've sewn this, it'll stretch again anyway, and so if you don't do this, it'll be massively too big. And I just want to show you the difference between the other side, which I haven't done this to yet, and how much bigger that is. Yeah, so that neckline would look absolutely horrible. You want to pull the thread so that this will be the same on both sides. And I'm also going to go to where I've marked the middle center, and I'm going to check, you know, that it's the same as the other side. So in this case, obviously I've done it a little bit too much. Yeah, and when they are the same, you can steam them individually, or just plonk them on like this and do that. Give it a really good steam, and it should totally disappear and lie flat. No puckering, sorry. If there is puckering, then you've gathered it too much. And I think I've pulled this quite a lot, but I do also know that this will stretch more, and I want the bust to come in more, and there's nothing worse than it just flopping about. If you are about 8 millimeters over, which is just like tiny little bit like that, then that's fine. The same on the armhole. So it's a good idea to take your pattern piece, that's my 18, and pop this on and see where that ends up. And you can see that this has totally stretched already. Good thing that you've checked it. You need to make sure that this does not stretch. Okay, here we haven't got any stretch anyway. That's all fine. It's this area which is the danger spot, really. So let's just pop this back on and see. Yep, very closer to what it needs to be. So this is not stretched anymore, it's fine. And I can do the same on the back. I'm just giving this a pre-press so I can see it. And I'm going to put that on, and I can see that's actually good. Just put the back on and see. So 1 centimeter over this neck of the woods. Yep, it's good. And if you want to secure these as well so that they don't go anywhere. And then your last check, ladies and gentlemen, is to put the seams on top of each other. And where is my seam? Here. And just check that these actually line up. They need to be the same. So I'm just going over. Seems to be a tiny little bit tight, my second one. Yes, it fits. Yes, it fits. And yes, it fits. So I'm happy with this now. So I know I've done well here. Now we're going to look at the binding. I've got a really beautiful silk satin binding here. And I thought, well, this is just a beautiful color. And I would love this as a trim to go to the outside, which is why I had to do my zip first. There's different ways of doing this. But in this instance, I am going to put my binding on the inside first. I want to hit just above here because I don't want to put a hook and eye on. And while I'm putting this on, I'm going to stretch it a little bit, even though I've already got my stay thread in, because this will unstretch itself. I tell you, if you don't stretch your bias binding on, it's no good. You need to stretch this a bit all the way while you're putting it on. Next step, it's sewn in, and you can see here that it's sewn right opposite each other, so that all works. And you can see I really stretched this on, yeah, so that when this stretches again, it only stretches to the point that it needs to go to. If you're doing this yourself, of course, you know, as a beginner, I wouldn't recommend at all to use something as thin as this. This is just because I've got it left over. It's 3 centimeters wide. Once I stretch this, it goes to like just about 2 centimeters. That's really hard to work with if you haven't done this before. So make sure that this strip here is actually 4 centimeters wide, not 3 when you do this. And now I can cut back the seam allowance all the way around. So my next step, now I've cut this back, is to roll my seam allowance downwards, because all of this is going to go down, right? So roll it downwards and stitch close to the edge all the way around. And by doing that, you're stretching out a little bit of this already. So if you hadn't pulled this taut, it'll make a big neckline. Now it's all stitched down on this side. This cannot roll out anymore. Roll this over and stitch it down. I just need to fold this in. The beginning is always the hardest on this sort of thing, and then the rest is okay. So what I tend to do is fold it all in. You could even hand stitch that last part first. You don't want this to slip out. Like that is fine, right? And then all I have to do is evenly stitch it down on that side. Good idea here is to just leave the thread hanging as you start, because it's really easy to get this like horribly wrong, and then thread up that thread and do this last little bit by hand, because you've got more control. I still think that I've got a little bit of a nose here, but that's okay. And I'm just gonna go in there and there, so I can pull that over a bit like that, see? And that's okay. Well, doing this with silk satin is I wouldn't recommend it. Do it with a nice quilting cotton and you have no problem getting this right. And also make your binding a bit bigger. That was it for today, and thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you next week when we'll be tackling some more sewing techniques. Bye! See you there!